If you're doing employee surveys, if you're in charge of them at an organization and you're not getting at least half your people to fill them out, then there is a problem.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to PeopleMetrics Live. My name is Madeline, and I am the marketing manager here at PeopleMetrics. I am joined here today by Sean and Kirk. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves to everyone?
Thanks, Madeline. Sean McDade, founder and CEO of PeopleMetrics. Great to be here today.
And hey, everybody. I'm Kirk Lobauer. I've been an account manager and an analyst on a number of our employee projects, so happy to be with you as well.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So as Sean and Kirk have said, we have been here at PeopleMetrics doing customer and employee experience measurement for a long time now. And we thought it would be cool to start running this PeopleMetrics Live event every week where we answer your questions about EX and CX. We've gotten a lot over the years and obviously have a lot of experience doing this. So it's fun to have this conversation every week. So let's just jump right into it. Today's topic is, how do you motivate employees to complete surveys? So I'll let you guys take it away.
Thanks, Madeline. It's this is a subject near and dear to me. I started the company in 2001, named it PeopleMetrics because we were all about getting feedback from employees, and a big way to do that is, of course, getting them to fill out surveys. So this is a great topic, I think, and that's certainly changed the way we get feedback and all, but the importance of it hasn't changed. And, Kirk, we know why we want to. Maybe we start with talking about that. Why do we even bother trying to motivate employees to complete these surveys? What's the point of all of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So with these employee surveys, ultimately, we are trying to improve the employee experience, which, at a strategic level there's a number of important reasons you want to do that. You're going to have better retention. You're going to get that higher discretionary effort from people who enjoy their job. It leads to better customer experience outcomes. And we did speak to that on our last session. So I'd recommend watching that as well if you want to see how those link, and ultimately better customer lifetime value. So there are benefits, clear operation benefits to it beyond just making sure everyone is enjoying their job as an employee, which is very important in its own right.
Right, and there's also some direct benefits to the employees too. So when they have a great experience and they're engaged, they tend to be around more. The retention's higher. They tend to give what we were talking about last week, discretionary effort. So effort above and beyond what is expected or required in the job, and they tend to recommend the company and recruit kind of people like them to the organization. So there's really good reasons to have a good employee experience, or a great one. Our philosophy is, if you can't measure where it is now, it's really hard to improve it, right? So one of the common ways to measure employee experience, right, Kirk, and you've run a bunch of these programs, is sending out surveys on a periodic basis to employees and asking them kind of their opinions on what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, employee experience, employee culture, there's a lot of underpinning of work that needs to be done to build that culture and build that experience. And just to understand where you stand on that, feedback is really important and essential in order to say, where are we and how can we improve?
So Madeline here has encouraged me to give kind of a compelling opinion in the beginning of these to get everybody's attention. So I'm going to give one. Okay, Madeline, is that good? You ready for it? Are you ready for it?
Yep.
if you're doing employee surveys, if you're in charge of them at an organization and you're not getting at least half your people to fill them out, then there is a problem, right? So this is a different type of situation than customer feedback, which we also do a PeopleMetrics Live on every Tuesday at 2. With customer, we'd be thrilled to get 20% response rate after we reach out to them, right? But with employees, it's very different. And I would say 50 is the bottom threshold. Our good clients are getting north of 75% response rates. And we even had one famous case, the highest I've ever seen, Kirk, and it's sort of legendary at the company, is we had a client with, what was it, like 8,000 employees, and they had a goal of 90% response rate, and they ended up achieving it and exceeding it by 4%. So they had a 94% response rate with 8,000 people, right? How crazy is that?
Yeah. So
Wow.
if you're below 50%, there's a lot of room to grow. That's for sure.
Right. And Kirk, as someone who's working on these projects, it's easy to say, well, you should have over 50%, et cetera. But why do you really need more than, why with employee surveys do you want as close to 100% as possible?
Yeah, and there's a couple of factors that go into that. And keeping with that comparison to the customer experience, if you think of customer feedback, if you hear from 10, 20% of a broad customer base, you've gotten a good sample and you have a good understanding. With employee surveying, you're trying to do something very different. Generally, you've got different locations with different managers, and you need to be able to target these areas to give each group a report and to give each group some area to improve and understand where they are with their employee experience. So you need to get that higher response threshold in order to be able to give them results that are meaningful. Also, and just as important, more important really, is that you need that higher threshold for anonymity. You cannot give kind of these managers responses if you only have kind of one or two bits of feedback from their location, and it's possible they could find out who gave that response. So you really need to get as many responses so each group has something to work on and employees can feel confident that it's anonymous.
Right, exactly. So, in order to improve employee experience and engagement, you need some sort of top-down, philosophy for sure. So you need an organizational priority based on everybody's feedback. We always talk about, we talk about one and one, and maybe we'll do a PeopleMetrics Live on just this topic, Madeline. I know I come up with ideas every time we do this, but it's one priority at an organizational level across the organization. So everybody's rowing in the same direction. And then you give people who are in charge of larger groups another priority that they can work on that's unique to them, right? And in order to hold people accountable and give them the results that they need to know whether they're improving, you need enough responses for those groups to understand sort of where employee experience is now, and after the priorities have been worked on for a while, did it change or not? So if you can't get them their reports with enough employees in them, then you can't hold them accountable for improving. So that's why it's so important to get as many responses as you can. 100 would be ideal. I never thought we would hit 94% in that kind of organization. But it's very possible. We've hit 75, 80 a lot of different times. So that is not a crazy idea. So that's really why the response rates are so high. So Kirk, why don't we get into some ways that we've found to really improve these response rates and to motivate employees to fill them out at a very, very high clip, like a couple examples we've already shared. What's kind of one thing that we can talk to the audience about that they can take today to start to do that?
Sure. Well, there are, I would say, kind of three overarching areas of what you really need to focus on to get the most out of your responses. Maybe I'll start with, one of the most important ones is of course, convenience, is meeting employees where they are. And that, I think, is something that not everyone gets right. If you want someone to respond to a survey, you need to make sure it's as easy as possible for them to do that. As such, you need to make sure that kind of in the way that you're presenting it to them, it's something that they have ready access to. And that will mean different things for different organizations. For offices that are primarily professional, where everyone has an email address, that most often is going to be an email address survey where it's sent to their professional email address. In offices that are, or in companies that are manufacturing or warehouses or groceries, that's a different approach. Not everyone has the same email address, or not everyone has an email address. So you need to make sure that you're giving them kind of an avenue to respond, and whether that's kiosks, computers in common rooms, paper surveys, though that's not ideal. Generally, you want kind of multiple modes of feedback for people to be able to respond in a way that's convenient for them. And that is a baseline. If you're not doing that, that's where you're really going to see you're not going to get the responses you need.
Yeah, I'll throw out another sort of controversial opinion that I just thought of. This meaning convenience or easy to take the survey, making it easy, is a lot more important than employee motivation to fill it out. Because you're going to have some employees super motivated no matter how hard it is to fill it out. You're going to have that group, but most employees are going to be like, I've got other things to do. It's is this really important? And we'll talk about ways that you can overcome that. But making it super easy to fill out, that's going to be the number one way you get your response rate up. And like Kirk said, how do you do that? You do that by enabling them to fill it out in the easiest way possible for them. So, email invitations is the most common way. It is the easiest way for most people, but make sure that those surveys are mobile friendly, right? They can fill it out on their mobile device. They can fill it out on their iPad, on their PC, right? So that's certainly something. But if you have a workforce, like Kirk said, that either does not have access to the internet or work in manufacturing and they don't have a company computer, then you have to figure out another way. And these days with COVID and the rightful goal of not having people touch things and then having other people touch them, that makes it even more challenging in that regard. So Kirk, what do you think? What kind of advice could you give someone, and we can, I can jump into, that has, say, a large manufacturing group within their organization? So email isn't available, and how do you get that group of people to respond in a way that's convenient to them?
Yeah, there's a number of ways to do that, and a number of ways we've employed. As we mentioned, kiosks, that's an option. Now in COVID, that can be a little more difficult to have a central place, but if you have a consistent process of keeping these things clean, so of course people feel comfortable and it is safe, then that's certainly a route you can take. Another route you can take is paper surveys, as we mentioned, though that's not ideal. And you can also, what we've seen is having kind of more intranets or kind of posters or placards kind of in the company, URLs that folks can access on their own, either or with their phone or at other ways at the computers that are at the company. So other URLs that they can access. We've seen those in the past. We've done it where that was put along with people's paychecks, where you get your paycheck and along with that, you also get this survey invite. So it's something that you're being handed out regularly, and it's at an avenue that you are readily receiving. That's just part of your normal process, and that's the key thing.
Yeah, I think the key point is thinking about your different populations within your organization. You almost have to map out their journey of filling out this survey, right? You have to think about, put yourself in their shoes. What's the easiest way to provide this feedback anonymously, right? Anonymous is the other, I think convenience and anonymity are key. So you have to make employee surveys anonymous. There has been some experiments with them not being anonymous. You need a really special culture to make that happen. That certainly isn't mainstream, and that's not where I would begin, right, in doing employee feedback. The employees should be confident that their response is something that cannot be tied to them. It's almost like, right, we're in the middle of this voting thing, right, and counting. I mean, it's not like any of us here could ever know who we voted for in this madness, right? It's anonymous, right? If everybody knew who people were voting for, then results would be very different in elections, right? So we don't, and it's the same with the employee piece. You just don't want that. So as long as that's there, then you can get to convenience. So how do you ensure anonymity, Kirk? Like how is that done? Like what are the ways that happens?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly, one part of that starts with communication. That needs to be very clear and upfront. However you're inviting employees, you need to make it very clear. We do not identify individuals, from the frontline employee up to the CEO. We don't know who is responding to this survey, and that should be made clear in all your communications. Also, it doesn't necessarily need to be your communications. One of the benefits of having a third-party provider is that you have that barrier between it's not just us. It's not just somebody feeling it. It is someone whose responsibility is to you and your anonymity and kind of that guarantee.
All right, Kirk. The audience is all friends with us, right? So we can tell them a secret, right? The reality is, for most employee surveys that use a third-party vendor like us and use email invitations to send them out, it's really confidential and not anonymous, right? Because we know. We know. Like, we meaning the vendor knows. Yes. But the company will not know. So yes. What happens in these surveys, right, is in order to not ask an employee lots and lots of questions that we already know about them, like which department are they in, what's their tenure, what's their gender, all these, what city do they live in, the company will pass along that information to us in what we call, an employee file with email address in it. We will send out those email invitations on the client's behalf. We will get the results back, so we'll know what's connected to what data are connected to whom, but we would never report it that way to the client, no matter what they say. So I don't know if you were involved in these, but I've had times where the clients demanded to know what an employee said and who it was, and given that we gave that assurance to the employees that it would be anonymous, we just can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have had those field those conversations, and I think what you mentioned there is a great point of that it's anonymous to the client, not necessarily to us. And even that is something that's worth communicating, because there is a natural understanding there of we're reaching out to you by email. There's an inherent, you understand that we know who you are, so it's that much more important that we make clear this is not communicated to your employer. We are a third party, and it is completely independent.
There is a way that some of our clients have gotten a truly anonymous feedback from employees, and that is what we call sending them a generic link. So a generic link is just a generic URL, www.peoplemetrics.com/company survey. The company itself sends it to all employees on an internal email. There's no personal identifiable information on that link to that link. It's the same. They go in and they answer all the questions about what department they're in. It's a longer survey. The problem with that is, outside of setting a cookie on each machine, you can't control response rates. You could see a stuffing of the ballot box phenomenon, where someone who's super happy or super unhappy could give a lot of feedback multiple times, like they're accusing some of these states of doing in this crazy election. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. But like, you could definitely do that, and if done that way. But you would also get pure anonymous feedback. So that's sort of the trade-off.
So certainly for employee or customer service, it's always best to have kind of some verification of, we know who that is. That's the best way, because it does on the reporting, and it makes it all that much more reliable. So that's definitely the way to do it. And I think kind of the last point I would make on anonymity, we focused a lot on kind of how you communicate that to employees. It is very important to note, of course, if you are a manufacturing or some workplace that is a physical space where not everyone has an email, anonymity there as well becomes a physical thing that you need to make possible, where you have the space and time to be able to complete this survey without concern of who is around you, and that it is anonymous. Right.
Like I had a client once who we were doing, for some employees, there was a paper survey because they couldn't, they didn't have email addresses. And the managers of these employees wanted to be in the room and watch them fill it out. And we had to say, no, that is not going to happen. So that's to your point. The employees have to feel like what they're doing is truly anonymous and safe.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And that's,
the other point that I think we just want to, in terms of anonymity, then we talked about convenience. Another way to make it super convenient for them is not make it too long, right? The survey too long, which is something we really want to emphasize. This survey should not take 20 minutes to fill out. It should be, 10 minutes or less. There's been even shorter surveys that have done really well in the employee experience space. But I think we would all agree, if you can get the feedback with shorter questions, fewer questions, you should. And we have a model, right, Madeline? It's 15 questions.
Yep.
With some generational questions. We have additional questions for each generation as well. And we should definitely do one of these on that model one day.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Kirk, you've seen longer surveys, right? What happens with a longer survey? You see response rate going down.
It's going to hit you in a couple of ways. One, you're going to see the response rate go down, so people drop off. Or, and this is even worse, you can see folks just straight lining through the survey. You're just trying to get through this thing, so it becomes a data fidelity issue. So yeah, and that is a very important thing. Convenient.
Well, why don't you explain what straight lining is in case people aren't aware of that?
Straight lining is where you're going to come across a big page of a survey of questions, and your eyes glaze over, and you say, "I'm just going to click, fives all the way. I'm going to click the top of the scale all the way down," and you're just going to straight line answer everything, just so you can keep moving through and finish that survey. And why you might do that? It could be possible you were engaged in the survey, you wanted to participate, but you didn't know that you'd signed up to be in the survey for that long. And so there could be some solid answers that you had given and intended to give until you were just sick of it. So I think for convenience, it's not just convenience in how you access it. You need to give them a way to access the survey as well as completing the survey. Convenience really is you need to approach it from every angle.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think of it is, you got to make people feel good that their opinion's going to count, and there's not going to be retribution, right? So if you don't do that, nothing else matters. Once you can get over that hurdle, you have to make it easy for them to fill it out, and make it short and convenient, and it's not going to be hard for them. But for people to really get that response rate up, I think you need a third thing that we talked about right earlier when we were talking about this call, Kirk, and that's giving them some sort of why should I fill this out to begin with, like a purpose. And to me, leadership and communication, that's where that comes in. Having leadership, namely the CEO, the highest level of the organization, talk about how important it is, what they're doing, why they're doing it, and most importantly, what are they going to do with the results, and by when. And Kirk, you've been in tons of these, and it's always the same, right? The ones that have good communication, if you can get over those first two hurdles we talked about, response rates will be there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a common trend of, if you take action on these, you're going to get that higher response rate. Which the reason for that is very clear. If I take a survey and then I see that nothing has happened in the interim and I'm asked to take a survey again, if you keep that going over years or however often you're fielding the survey, I see less and less purpose and incentive to respond. And so you are going to drop off. And however, on the flip side, when you make those changes, that creates an incentive to respond. However, you need to make clear that this was on account of your feedback. We asked you for feedback, we listened to you, we made the change, and now we're coming back to ask what else we can do. And so that's often, whenever we feel this follow-up wave of a survey, we'll start with indicating what we did since the last time around.
Yeah, and that's super important. And that communication, it starts from the very top, but it doesn't end there, right? So managers then have to reinforce that to their teams, or their leaders have to reinforce that to their teams. That's how that client who got 94% did it, right? It began with the CEO saying how important, but then every single manager reinforced that and talked about its importance. And they were also getting data that was down to their work group that they were then responsible for working on, which gets back to why we want as many people to respond as possible. So all of those things. And the other thing, you were asking me earlier about how they did it. The other way they did it is they had a 90% goal, which seemed audacious. It was like, they talk about these big, hairy, audacious goals and strategy, like some crazy goal that you can't really believe you're going to reach. It's like when JFK said we're going to go to the moon, right? That's a big, hairy, audacious goal. 90% seemed like it to me. I'm like, I don't know if we should have that goal. I told them it seems like it's really, really going to be hard. But they did it, they had it. And I think it was a rallying cry to the entire organization. So then some peer pressure started to build up, like, yeah, we're close. And oh, we got it. And let's beat it. And then what happened was after they passed it, some groups hadn't passed it. So I'm just making this up, like accounting passed it, but sales didn't. So then sales felt like some pressure to get their group over 90%. Until everybody was over 90%. Every major work group was over 90%. So there's a lot of marketing that goes into getting people to fill out these surveys too, right? Like, so you can have communication verbally, but you can also have some cool posters and other things, right? We've seen that in some of your accounts, I believe, Kirk, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really, I would say, the devil's in the details there, where when you're coming up with a survey or when you're asking for feedback, people are only going to respond when you make that ask. And so you need to build a communication plan where you are reaching out to your employees with some frequency at those channels where you interact with them. For some companies that, if you have TVs that are on the floor or something like that, it's going to be through these screens. If you're having regular meetings with managers, either floor meetings or individual meetings, they are kind of encouraging this, but it should be kind of a systemic communication plan. That way you are kind of reminding employees, this is a priority, this is something that we want to complete. And it's, as long as you outline the rest of those things, if your communication outlines the anonymity, it outlines the convenience, it outlines the purpose, put that together with the communication, and that's how you'll drive up that response rate.
Totally. How about COVID, Kirk? What do you think COVID has done to employees' inclination to fill out surveys and, this whole response rate kind of idea and motivation?
Yeah, I'd say the positive thing is, that we've seen is that since the work environment has changed, that has made employees all that much more eager to give that feedback. Because this situation's changed, that's something that they want to weigh in on, these changes that, of course, are impacting your day-to-day lives. So from actually collecting responses, that's great. That is positive news. You do need to now be more thoughtful as to how you're outreaching in the time to, of course, keep safety the number one priority. But we've certainly seen changes on account of COVID. Yeah,
I agree. I think especially if the workplace has changed, if people are remote or if they're in a hybrid workplace, they definitely would like to provide feedback. And I think there's room in these surveys now to ask about it. Like, how are you feeling about the new work environment? I would have a couple of rating questions, but I would mainly have open-ended questions around that and read what people are saying. I think it's very well worth your while. Getting regular feedback from employees at this time, I think is a really good idea. And I think that you're right. They're motivated to do it. They're motivated to provide the feedback. Madeline, I think we've gotten through all the points that we wanted to highlight so far. And
And I just have one question coming in here about response rates, just saying that my response rates are really low. What can I do to change that?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the things that we had talked about so far. The number one way I think you can improve it is to make it as easy as possible for people to fill it out. If it's already as easy as possible and you're making sure it's anonymous, then it gets trickier, and you have to really examine what your communication is like. What kind of reason are you giving your folks to fill it out? And are you truly prepared to do what you need to do with the results to make an improvement and communicate that? That's when it gets, it depends where you are. You may have some low-hanging fruit. If it's difficult to fill it out or whatever, then that's easy. If not, then there's some higher order things that I need to look at. Anything you want to add there, Kirk?
Yeah, I would say that's often with these things, it's very specific to the organization. And so this thought process gives you a great framework for how do I attack these low response rate issues of, am I giving my employees, even if we promise us that it's anonymous, am I giving them kind of the space and guarantee that they actually feel comfortable doing that? Is it convenient? Not just how we're distributing it, but is the survey itself convenient to take? And then find exactly as you said, are we actually communicating this purpose? And is the communication plan one that is really aggressive enough to encourage employees to respond? And so that's going to be different for each organization. But if you go through those key steps, that's how you're going to be able to diagnose it.
This seems like there's a lot of discussion on one topic that's kind of in the weeds a little bit, but there's no more important thing to think about than getting getting the maximum number of people to contribute to their voice. Right? It has a lot of benefits. And if you can't do this, then almost nothing else matters within these programs, because if you don't have enough data from your employees, then you can't do a lot with these. So it really, I think, makes sense, and it doesn't have to be PeopleMetrics, but it makes sense to have a partner who really can help you drive response rates. And we've been doing this so long, we know what subject lines work, we know how long the email should be, we know what a landing page should look like as somebody goes on. There's a lot of other very, very granular things that you can do to improve. But my high level piece of advice is make sure this is part of your plan when you're planning a survey to employees. It's not just who we're serving, what questions we're going to ask, what are we going to do with the results. It's how are we going to get them to fill it out?
Yeah.
And that should be a deliberate journey that you're mapping for each one of your employees to get the highest response rates possible.
Thank you so much, Sean and Kirk. This has been I think you're right there that there's a lot of focus obviously on this topic, but it's the first step. How else do you get to the rest of an employee experience program and making great changes within your organization if no one's filling out the surveys? So it's a great starting point. And I think you're totally right what you said about this time of COVID, where everybody had their work schedule, whether they're remote or in person, just turned upside down. And I think people are more eager than ever to contribute to that conversation and say, hey, this is what I'm enjoying about this is what I'm not. And they want to see that their organization is actually doing something to address those concerns. So thank you so much, both of you, for this session today. And thank you all for joining us for PeopleMetrics Live. If you have any friends or colleagues who couldn't make it to this session, no worries. We are going to be posting all of the recordings of PeopleMetrics Live on our YouTube channel, so you can check out sessions that have happened previously and also ones that are coming up. You can also follow us on all the social networks, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And I encourage you all to also check out our employee experience blog, which is at peoplemetrics.com/ex-blog for even more employee experience content from us. And like I said earlier, we have a lot of great sessions still coming up for PeopleMetrics Live in the next few weeks. We'll be answering some CX questions next Tuesday, the 10th, and you can check out all the other topics that we're going to be discussing by just looking at our events page, and that's www.peoplemetrics.com/events. And as always, we loved hearing from all of you. So if you just please keep sending your CX and EX questions to us. And I know we added a few more topics today just in this session, so we'll be looking to answer more questions in the future too. Thank you all again for joining us, and thanks, Sean and Kirk, and everybody have a great day.